In this tutorial, we're going to go over animations. So this is going to cover the basics of animation, how you can start animating objects. We won't go too deep into it, but we are going to cover some important stuff. So first thing first, we're going to take advantage of the tabs in Blender. We can click animation and we can start animating our object right away. So first thing that we can see is that it brings us to this dope sheet. So if we click the drop down menu in here, we can see that top sheet is one thing in the animation that it opened up, so it probably means that it is at least Blender devs think it's important. So in here what we can do is, if I click E on the keyboard, I can click on, let's say, location, and now I have my object with his XYZ locations pinned as a keyframe. So if I click E, I can basically insert keyframes in there. We can also do it from here. Let me see where it is. We have apply location. It should be able to apply it from there, but I don't remember exactly where the option is. I usually use the keyboard, so you can click E to get insert keyframes, and in here you have a bunch of options. Most that you're gonna use is you can use available, which is basically what you have in here, but most that you're going to use is just location, rotation, and scale. So you can kind of just keyframe everything, so you know that whenever you move, rotate, or scale your object, it's gonna be applied again. But you can also just use separately. If you just want to rotate objects, you can use just rotate. So we can actually maybe start with that. So let's add rotate. Now you can see that we have a location, rotation, and rotation. Location and rotation. So let's select our location and delete it. So we just have the rotation of the object. So let's say we just want this object to uniformly rotate 360 degrees. So first thing that I would do is, since I started from frame 1, I want to start from frame 0. I'm gonna select my keys. You can click on this top key and it will gonna select everything at the bottom. Click G and then move it to the left. So you can use G to basically move in 2D your keyframes. And now, let's say at frame 30, we want the object to be rotated 360 degrees. So first thing that I'm going to do is click on this button, which basically means I want to auto key whenever my object is rotated or moved, and there is a key already for in here, we want to just apply it. So I'm going to click R, Z, and then type 360 on the keyboard. And the reason why I do this is because Blender gives me an option. Instead of me clicking R and then trying to rotate it or typing it in here, I can actually rotate it or move it on specific axes. So I can click RX or RY or RX, hold shift, and then some other axis, and we can actually rotate it in 2 axes. So Blender gives me this option to basically figure out in which axis I want to rotate stuff. So that is a really nice quick way to kind of rotate your objects or move your objects. And let's actually delete these other things that are keyframed. So now we can see our object is moving, but let's move it actually. So we have our start and end frames, and we're gonna set the end frames to 30. So if I click space and we see the animation, we can see that it is not moving uniformly, but it is looping. It does stop and start. So first thing that we are gonna go over is that in here we can see our 3 X, Y, and Z rotation that are keyframe, but there are also keyframes on this and this and this, and they're just referencing the object, saying, okay, this cube has some keyframe in here, and that is a cube action, and also it is part of the object transforms, and then here are the actual keys or keyframes. So if you click on any of these keyframes, you can see how you can select them individually, but if you click in the hierarchy anywhere at the top, they're gonna all be selected. So that's one thing. And also you can see here these X and Y are kind of whiter between the 2 keyframes. That basically means they do not change. And then in here we can see that it is not white, meaning that only Z has actually changed. Now, why does this happen? Why is our interpolation between these two keyframes, why is it goes slow, then goes faster, then slows down? The reason for this is that the interpolation is not linear. So if I click A here and click E, or actually, let's click right click and then interpolation type, we can basically choose how we want, what we want to happen in between two keyframes. Do you want it to start slow, go fast, or something like that? We can do something like this, where it is gonna start slow and then speed up right away, and then start slow, speed up right away. So if it's like this, it's slow down, speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down, speed up. So we can change kind of how things, what happens in between keyframes, and we want this linear. And this basically means it's just gonna move it, each frame it's gonna, so it basically divides 360 with 30 frames, which would be 10, 11. So it should move 11 frames each frame, or 12 maybe, okay. So I miscalculated, it will be 12 frames, 12 degrees each frame. So it basically just divides it equally and says, okay, that's how you're going to move. And if you click space, we can see how it is smoothly rotating. So this is some things that you have to keep in mind when you're working with keyframes in Blender. And this is probably in most other software that you're going to keep in mind. Now you have some dynamic effects in here that you can use, probably not useful in here, but you can just check them out. It kind of bounces around, and it is still smooth since we put keyframes at the right places. And you can see if I set it to linear and then move my keyframe one up, and I start from beginning, we can see how there is a frame where it stops, and that is because we do not have looping animation, so we have to start from the beginning. And one small thing when you're trying to loop something, frame 0 and frame 360 are actually the same frame. So if I just click between them, the cube is standing in the same place. So our animation actually starts from frame 1 and skips this 0. So it will be the same if I clicked E in here and then clicked rotation and then delete this frame. So we have first frame is 12 and then last frame is 360. This should also smoothly rotate. So our animation actually does not start from 0. If it starts from 0, it's not going to be perfectly looping. So you can see it still stops. So that is just one small thing that people usually learn through experience when they notice that these are not working exactly how they want them to. So this is one thing. Now, this is not the only thing that you can do in Blender with animations. We can also go to Action Editor. And in here, if you want multiple animations for our cube, we can create multiple actions in here. So I can create a new action, name it maybe cube jump. And let's say in our cube jump, we don't want any keyframes to be here. Let's click location, and let's click Control C and then go to back, Control V. And let's select everything, click right click, and then do our bounce. And actually, I want this to happen only for Z. So let's see if we can do this. Actually, can I interpolate? I don't think I can. I have to move it a bit up. And yeah, I forgot I have auto keying enabled, so let's delete this. I can also disable this. So now we can see how it goes from one point to another with our interpolation. So that's kind of what we can do with separate actions. Now we can go back to our first action, and we can see our cube is rotating. Now you might notice it is not in the same location. So if you're creating multiple animations, it might be good to just keyframe locations so it snaps after you swap the animations. So right now we want our location to always be to 0. So now if we go to this cube and we jump up and go back to this cube, it should set, oh, I did not set this to 0. Okay. Now I need to keyframe this because I disabled auto keyframing. So now if you go in here, we put animation this way and then go back. We have our location set. So this is just you have to keep in mind if you're creating multiple animations. And the last thing that we are going to go over in this is if you go to Graph Editor, and in here I'm going to hold Control and move down, and Graph Editor basically shows you the lines and what's happening, basically like we had interpolation, but in here we have a bit more controls. So let's say I want to create my custom lines. I can do, let's do Bezier curve. So when I select now this point, I can basically choose, I think I also need let me see, we need 3. Oh yeah, I cannot do it because we have this also not Bezier, I think. Handle type, maybe this one. I'm basically trying to enable this other handle, but in any case, you have this handle that now you can move and select how you want your animation to look like. So right now we have the X, actually we have 3 of them, so let's disable some of them. Let's disable everything except X. Yeah, the X rotation. So in here we have our Bezier curve, and I can choose how I want my objects to change over time in between keyframes. So I can move this keyframe, I can select what happens, and now we have this animation, so it combines 2 rotations, and I can for some reason move it like this, and now you have this animation. So in here you can kind of customize more instead of using pre-made curves in interpolation. So this can be really useful if you have something like this cube and you want some movement that is not normally shown. You can do it in this, and you can also let's see, if I click Shift D, what I can also do is just create a new keyframe, and in here I can work similarly like I can do in the dope sheet. So in here I would create a keyframe, and then I have some pre-made options for interpolation, but whenever you want more customization, you will need to go to the graph editor, which is in here. So that's kind of the basics of animation. Of course, there is way more options. There is also the NLA, or nonlinear animation. You also have drivers if you want some specific movement that is maybe controlled by something else. This is good for rigging, stuff like that. And you also have simplified version of the dope sheet, which is kind of a timeline where you can just put your keyframes and just quickly animate something. But this should kind of help you to start animating your objects and know how to interpolate between keyframes, which will become really helpful when you do anything more complicated than just moving something from one place to another.